keys came flying at my face without warning. I caught them purely on instinct, the metal cold and sharp against my palms. Around the conference table, 12 people watched. Some looked away. Others smiled like they'd been waiting for this exact moment. Blake Hoffman leaned back in his leather chair, arms crossed, that trademark smirk spreading across his face. "Don't scratch it," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Those keys are worth more than your yearly salary." Laughter rippled through the room. Not genuine amusement, the nervous kind that people use to align themselves with power. My stomach dropped, but I kept my face neutral. Showing anger would only feed him, give him exactly what he wanted. I stood there holding his Ferrari keys, heat crawling up my neck. This wasn't about needing his car moved. This was theater. A public demonstration of who mattered and who didn't. My manager Paulina chuckled from her seat at Blake's right hand. She didn't even try to hide it. Around the table, people shifted in their chairs, suddenly fascinated by their notebooks and laptop screens. I forced a small smile and set the keys on the table in front of him. "I think you can handle your own parking, Blake." My voice came out steadier than I felt. He picked up the keys slowly, examining them like I might have damaged them with my touch. Then he leaned back and said something that changed everything. "Don't scratch it. Those are worth more than your salary." The heat that had been crawling up my neck reached my face. I could feel everyone watching, waiting to see if I'd cry or yell or do something that would make this worse. My hand trembled once before I tucked it behind the folder I was holding. I looked around the table, making brief eye contact with each person. Most avoided my gaze. One woman, Claire from accounting, bit her lip like she wanted to say something but wouldn't. The silence stretched, heavy and uncomfortable. Blake stood up, still wearing that satisfied smirk. He walked around the table toward me, each step deliberate. When he reached my chair, he patted my shoulder like I was a child who'd just learned a lesson. "Good girl," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. That's when it clicked for me. This wasn't about car keys or parking. This was about power. About him establishing dominance in front of an audience. About reminding everyone in the room who was untouchable. My manager Paulina cleared her throat. "Blake's just joking around," she said, her tone light but pointed. "You should lighten up, Megan. We're all friends here." The implication was clear. The problem wasn't Blake's behavior. The problem was my reaction to it. The meeting wrapped up quickly after that. People gathered their things, avoiding my eyes as they filed out. Blake lingered by the door, waiting until we were the last two in the room. He leaned close, his voice low. "Remember who matters here." I stepped into the hallway and let the door close behind me. My heart pounded against my ribs. I walked to the water cooler, filled a small paper cup, and drank it slowly. Breathe. Think. Don't react. The truth is, my name is Megan Callahan, and I'm the person who keeps this branch running when everyone else is busy looking impressive. I'm the one who fixes the mistakes, handles the angry clients, processes the paperwork nobody else wants to touch. I've been here for 3 months, transferred from corporate to stabilize operations after 3 people quit without notice. The official story was burnout. The real story was Blake Hoffman. Blake is the top salesman. The moneymaker, the golden boy who brings in more revenue than anyone else in the region. He's protected by his numbers, enabled by Paulina, and worshipped by people who think success excuses cruelty. Before I was transferred, corporate gave me quiet instructions. Watch, document, don't stir up drama. They knew something was wrong here. They just needed proof. I walked to my desk, set down my folder, and opened my laptop. My hands were steady now. Rage had crystallized into something colder, sharper. Blake Hoffman had just made a very public mistake. My phone buzzed. An email notification. Subject line, immediate, process change. Corporate oversight. I clicked it open, my pulse quickening. The message was brief but significant. All branch compliance exceptions had to be reported within 24 hours. No exceptions. I sat back in my chair, reading the email 3 times. This wasn't random. Corporate was tightening controls, which meant they were preparing for something. The timing felt deliberate, right after my first month of observation reports. 2 months earlier, I'd been called into a meeting at headquarters. The VP of Operations, a stern woman named Victoria, had laid out the situation bluntly. The Riverside branch is bleeding talent. 3 resignations in 4 months, all citing cultural concerns. We need eyes on the ground. She'd slid a folder across her desk. Blake Hoffman is our top performer there. Untouchable numbers. But something's wrong. We need documentation before we can act. I'd understood immediately. They suspected misconduct, but couldn't prove it without internal evidence. Watch quietly, Victoria had said. Document everything. Don't engage in workplace drama. We need facts, not emotions. I'd agreed, thinking it would be straightforward. I hadn't expected Blake to be quite this bold. Now, sitting at my desk with corporate's new compliance email open, I understood. They were building a case, and Blake had just performed his arrogance in front of 12 witnesses. I opened a new document on my laptop and started typing. Date, time, location, witnesses present. Blake's exact words, Paulina's response, the laughter, the shoulder pat, the whispered threat, everything documented in clean factual language. My phone buzzed again. A text from an unknown number. Saw what happened in there. Not okay, Dev. I looked across the office and saw Dev from IT, his eyes meeting mine briefly before he looked away. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the scene, Blake's smirk, the keys flying at me, the laughter, but underneath the humiliation was something else. A pattern I'd been watching for weeks was finally becoming clear. 2 months ago, when I first arrived, Blake had been charming. He'd introduced himself with a firm handshake and a practiced smile. Megan, right? Heard you're here to help us get organized. We could use that. His tone had been friendly, professional. But I'd noticed small things immediately. The way he interrupted women in meetings but let men finish speaking, how he took credit for collaborative work, the subtle ways he undermined people while maintaining plausible deniability. I'd watched him reduce a junior analyst named Hannah to tears over a minor formatting error, then tell everyone she was too emotional for client-facing work. Hannah had quit 2 weeks later. I'd seen him publicly praise Paulina for ideas that came from other team members, building her loyalty while stealing recognition from people who couldn't fight back. And I'd noticed how he controlled resources, project assignments, client relationships, even office supplies, like a feudal lord distributing favors. Corporate had sent me here because they suspected something. Now I knew. Blake wasn't just arrogant. He was systematically creating a toxic environment where speaking up meant career suicide. The email about compliance exceptions wasn't random. Corporate was preparing to act. They just needed the right evidence at the right time. My job was to provide it without becoming Blake's next target. The next morning, I arrived early and went straight to my desk. I needed to update a client packet for one of Blake's accounts, routine work that should have taken 20 minutes. I opened Blake's shared project folder and immediately noticed something wrong. The revenue numbers in his client presentation didn't match the figures in our internal tracking system. Not slightly off, strategically different. The presentation showed higher projected returns and faster timelines than our actual contracts supported. It was the kind of thing that could get clients to sign while setting up the company for failed expectations and legal exposure later. My finger tightened around my mouse. This wasn't a typo. This was intentional misrepresentation. I took screenshots, saved them to my personal encrypted folder, and added notes with timestamps. As I was closing the files, Blake strolled by my desk. He didn't look at me directly, just glanced at my screen as he passed. "Careful in my files, Callahan," he said casually. "You might break something with those little hands." The condescension was automatic for him now. He didn't even pause to see my reaction. Just kept walking toward the break room. I sat perfectly still, watching him go. Then I opened a private document I'd been keeping, a log hidden in my personal cloud storage. I added today's date, Blake's comment about my hands, and the discrepancy I'd found in his files. Each entry was time-stamped and detailed. I went to the restroom and stood in front of the mirror. My reflection looked tired. I practiced keeping my expression neutral, calm, professional. I wasn't going to explode. I wasn't going to give Blake or Paulina any excuse to paint me as emotional or difficult. I was going to outlast him. And I was going to do it by being better at the game than he was. When I came back to my desk, I heard Blake's voice carrying from the break room. He was talking to someone, his tone casual and loud enough to ensure I'd hear. She's not even real management, just corporate's little spy. So he knew I was from headquarters, or suspected. Either way, he was establishing a narrative, painting me as an outsider, someone who didn't belong, someone the team shouldn't trust. I sat down and updated my log, added his comment, noted the time and likely witnesses. Then I went back to work like nothing had happened. Around 11, Paulina called a quick meeting. She announced that Blake's favorite coworker, Claire, would be leading the Sanderson account presentation next week. The same presentation I'd built from scratch over the past month. Claire wouldn't look at me as she accepted the assignment. She mumbled something about being honored for the opportunity. Blake watched me from across the room, waiting for a reaction. I nodded once. "Congratulations, Claire. Let me know if you need any background materials." My voice was steady, professional, empty of emotion. Blake's smile faltered slightly. He'd wanted tears or anger. Instead, he got polite cooperation. That afternoon, my phone rang. External call. I answered and immediately recognized the voice. James Sanderson, the client whose account I'd just been removed from. "Megan, I need to understand something," he said, his tone clipped and professional. "I just received an email promising deliverables that don't match our contract scope. Can you explain?" My stomach dropped. I pulled up the email chain and saw Blake's name all over it. He'd promised the client features we legally couldn't provide without regulatory approval. Approval that would take months and might not come at all. "Mr. Sanderson, I need to review this carefully and get back to you," I said. "Can I call you within the hour?" He agreed, his frustration obvious. I pulled the call recording from our system. All client calls were automatically logged. I listened to Blake's smooth voice making promises he had to know we couldn't keep. Then I checked the contract terms. Everything he'd promised violated our agreement. Before I could draft a response, an email popped up from Blake. Subject line, "Sanderson account issues." The message was masterfully written, subtly routing blame toward me while maintaining plausible deniability. "Megan may have misunderstood the client's needs during initial onboarding. I've attempted to realign expectations, but we may need management intervention to resolve the confusion she's created." My chest tightened as I read it. He was setting me up, creating a paper trail that made me responsible for his promises. 30 seconds later, Paulina forwarded Blake's email to me with one line: "Fix this. Now." I took 3 deep breaths before responding. Getting emotional would play into Blake's hands. Instead, I needed to respond with facts. Clear, documented, undeniable facts. I opened a new email and addressed it to both Paulina and Blake. No accusations, no emotion, just clean truth. Attached, original contract scope, signed by all parties, client communication log, showing initial requirements gathering, and policy documentation, outlining regulatory limitations on the requested features. Proposed resolution, conference call with client to clarify realistic timeline and deliverables within contract bounds. I'm available this afternoon. I attached every relevant document, each one time-stamped and official. The evidence showed exactly what had been promised, what was possible, and where Blake's commitments diverged from reality. I hit send and immediately copied everything to my personal documentation folder. Whatever happened next, I had proof. Blake's response came within 5 minutes. Reply all. "Maybe Megan should stick to parking cars instead of handling client relationships. Some of us actually understand how to make sales." The parking cars reference. A direct callback to the Ferrari keys incident from yesterday. He was establishing a pattern of humiliation in writing, creating a documented trail of his own misconduct. I didn't respond. Didn't need to. His email spoke for itself. Instead, I forwarded the entire chain to my corporate contact with a simple note. "FYI, client issue requiring policy clarification." 20 minutes later, Dev from IT appeared at my cubicle. He glanced around to make sure no one was watching, then lowered his voice. "I saw what happened in the meeting yesterday." Dev's eyes flicked to the cameras mounted in the ceiling corners, like they might hear us. "I've seen other things too," he said quietly. "Things I couldn't say anything about because..." He trailed off, but I understood. Speaking up meant becoming Blake's next target. He pulled a sticky note from his pocket and placed it on my desk, his hand covering it. When he pulled away, I saw a date scribbled in blue ink, 3 weeks ago. "Check the expense reports from that week," he whispered. The client dinner claims. Then he walked away, back to his desk on the other side of the office. I waited 10 minutes before casually opening the expense management system. I navigated to Blake's submissions and filtered by the date Dev had given me. 3 separate client dinner expenses, all at high-end restaurants, all hitting the maximum allowable amount. I cross-referenced them with our client calendar. None of the claimed clients had meetings scheduled those nights. I checked email logs, no dinner confirmations sent or received. My stomach flipped, not with excitement, but with certainty. This wasn't one bad moment. This was a system. Blake had been submitting fraudulent expense claims probably for months. I dug deeper, pulling reports from the past 6 months. The pattern was consistent. Expensive dinners claimed as client entertainment, always at the same upscale places, always on nights when no client meetings existed. I saved everything to my encrypted folder, adding detailed notes about the discrepancies. Then I noticed something else. One of the expense receipts included a photo. Standard procedure for amounts over $100. I zoomed in on the receipt photo Blake had submitted. It was from an expensive steakhouse downtown, dated 3 weeks ago. The image was slightly blurry, but clear enough to see what Blake probably hadn't noticed when he uploaded it. In the background, reflected in a wine glass on the table, I could make out 2 people. Blake's profile was unmistakable. And sitting across from him, laughing, was Claire. The same Claire who'd just been given my project lead role. This wasn't a client dinner, it was a date. Submitted as a business expense and charged to the company. I sat back in my chair, my mind racing through the implications. This was fraud. Clear, documentable fraud. Combined with the client misrepresentation in the hostile work environment, it painted a picture of someone who believed rules didn't apply to him. I copied the image, saved it with annotations, and added it to my growing file. Then I went back to work, keeping my expression neutral. Around me, the office carried on with its normal rhythm. Nobody knew that the evidence was piling up, piece by piece. That afternoon, I was at the copier when Blake appeared beside me. Too close. Close enough that I could smell his expensive cologne and see the tiny scar above his left eyebrow. "You're not going to make problems for me," he said softly. His voice was calm, almost friendly, but his eyes were hard. "Because if you do?" He paused, letting the threat hang in the air. "I'll make sure you're gone before you can blink." I kept sorting my papers, my hands steady even though my heart was racing. "I'm just doing my job, Blake," I said, matching his calm tone, processing accounts, updating records, nothing dramatic. He leaned closer, and I forced myself not to step back. "See that you keep it that way." Then he walked off, leaving me standing by the copier with my pulse pounding in my ears. I went back to my desk and added the interaction to my log. Date, time, location, exact words, threat made, every detail preserved. That evening I sent an email to Paulina requesting a process alignment meeting to discuss standard compliance procedures. The agenda was innocuous: reviewing policy documentation, confirming approval workflows, aligning on client communication protocols. Paulina agreed immediately, probably thinking it was bureaucratic nonsense she could breeze through. She scheduled it for Friday morning, 3 days away. I added Blake to the invite with a note. Blake should attend since this impacts client-facing work. He responded with a casual, "Sure, I'll swing by." I could practically hear the boredom in his typing. He had no idea what was coming. Over the next 3 days, I prepared meticulously. I reviewed every relevant policy, highlighted the sections that Blake's behavior violated, and organized my documentation chronologically. I wasn't going to accuse him of anything. I was just going to ask innocent questions and let him explain himself. Friday morning arrived. The meeting was scheduled for 10 o'clock. Blake showed up 15 minutes late, coffee in hand, radiating casual confidence. He dropped into a chair across from Paulina and smiled at me. "So what's this about? New paperwork requirements?" I pulled up the agenda on the shared screen. "Just wanting to make sure we're all aligned on standard processes," I said pleasantly, "especially with the new corporate compliance requirements." I started with easy questions. Client communication protocols. Who approves what gets promised to clients? Blake answered smoothly, citing the official policy. Paulina nodded along, clearly bored. Then I moved to expense reporting. "Just to clarify, client entertainment expenses require which documentation?" Blake rattled off the requirements without hesitation. Receipt, client name, business purpose, standard stuff. And the client meeting needs to be documented somewhere? Calendar, email confirmation, something like that? I kept my tone light, genuinely curious. Blake shifted slightly in his chair. Well, yeah, usually. But sometimes things are informal. A quick dinner to maintain relationships, that kind of thing. I made a note. So informal client meetings still count as business expenses even without documented confirmation? Paulina jumped in. Within reason. We trust our team to use good judgment. I nodded, typing their responses into the meeting notes. Blake was relaxing, thinking this was just administrative box checking. He didn't realize I was building a record of what he claimed policy allowed. We moved through several more topics. Each time, I asked simple questions. Each time, Blake explained how things really worked versus what the written policy said. Each time, he contradicted official guidelines while Paulina nodded approval. At the end of the meeting, I smiled. Great. I'll send a recap for everyone to confirm, just so we're all aligned on these process interpretations. I spent 2 hours crafting that recap email. Every statement Blake made, quoted directly and attributed to him. Every policy exception Paulina had approved, documented with her exact words. The email read like harmless meeting notes. Until you realized it locked both of them into positions they couldn't later deny. Blake had claimed informal client meetings didn't need documentation. Paulina had confirmed that personal judgment overrode written policy. All of it preserved in writing, time-stamped, and distributed to all participants. Blake's response came within an hour. Just one word, fine. But even through text, I could feel his irritation. The period at the end felt aggressive, like he'd stabbed the keyboard. 20 minutes after that, something strange happened. I tried to access the client tracking system and got an error message. Access denied. Contact administrator. I immediately opened a ticket with IT. Lost access to client tracker. Please restore ASAP. Need it for active accounts. While I waited for response, I documented the exact time access disappeared, what I'd been working on, and the timing relative to my meeting recap email. Dev from IT called me within 30 minutes. Megan, your access was removed by request from management. His voice was careful, professional. I'm restoring it now, but I wanted you to know it wasn't a system glitch. Who requested the removal? I asked, already knowing the answer. Dev paused. The request came from Paulina's account, logged about 15 minutes after your meeting recap email went out. I thanked him, hung up, and added everything to my log. Then I requested the audit trail. The digital record showing exactly when access was removed and who authorized it. Systems remember what people lie about. The next morning, Paulina called me into her office. She was smiling, the fake warm smile she used when she wanted something. Megan, we need to talk. She gestured to the chair across from her desk. I sat down, keeping my expression neutral and professional. Paulina tapped a pen against her desk blotter, a nervous habit I'd noticed before. Blake mentioned you've been difficult lately. Not collaborative. Maybe struggling with the team dynamic here. My throat tightened, but I kept my voice steady. Can you give me specific examples? I want to make sure I understand the concern. Paulina's smile stiffened. It's more of a general observation, the way you handle certain situations. Your communication style. I'd like to understand what behaviors need to change, I said calmly. Specific incidents would help me improve. She didn't like that. Vague accusations worked better than specific claims I could disprove. Paulina reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a document. She slid it across the desk toward me. My stomach dropped as I recognized the header, Performance Improvement Plan. It was already printed, already formatted, like it had been waiting for the right moment. This outlines some areas we'd like to see you focus on, Paulina said, her tone shifting to business formal. Communication, collaboration, flexibility in approach. I scanned the document. Every criticism was subjective. Needs to be more adaptable. Should improve team integration. Must develop stronger collaborative relationships. Nothing specific. Nothing measurable. Nothing I could actually defend against. I'd like time to review this, I said, and I'll need written examples of the specific behaviors you're referencing with dates. Paulina's smile disappeared completely. This is standard process, Megan. I understand, I said calmly. And I'm sure corporate would want me to fully understand the concerns before signing anything. I'll need documentation of the specific incidents that led to this plan. I kept my tone professional, reasonable. Not confrontational, just following protocol. Paulina's jaw tightened. You have until Monday to review it. I nodded and stood up, taking the document with me. Thank you for the feedback. I'll let you know if I have questions. I walked out of her office and straight to my desk. My hands were shaking now, but not from fear. From recognition. This was retaliation. Clear, obvious retaliation for documenting Blake's policy violations. I sat down, opened my laptop, and composed an email to corporate oversight. The message was carefully worded, professional, and specific. I need guidance on 2 situations. 1, my system access was temporarily removed following a compliance documentation meeting. And 2, I've been presented with a performance improvement plan that lacks specific behavioral examples or measurable objectives. Both occurred within 24 hours of distributing meeting notes that documented policy interpretation questions. Please advise on proper procedure. I attached the PIP document, the IT audit trail showing when my access was removed, and my meeting recap email. Everything time-stamped and factual. I hit send and sat back in my chair. My heart was pounding, but I felt clearer than I had in weeks. This was the moment. Either corporate would support me, or I'd know I needed to find a new job. The response came within an hour. From Victoria herself. We're scheduling a site visit. Do not alert branch leadership. The next morning felt surreal. I arrived at work to find Blake in an unusually good mood. He'd brought in a box of expensive pastries from a downtown bakery, offering them around the office with a generous smile. Morning, everyone. Fuel up. It's going to be a great week. He was playing the role of team leader, magnanimous and friendly. Several people thanked him, grabbing donuts and coffee. He even offered the box to me. Megan, blueberry scone? I know you like those. The specific detail caught me off guard. Had he been paying attention to what I ate? Or was this performance art? Thanks, I said, taking one to avoid making a scene. Blake's smile was warm, but his eyes tracked my every movement. This sudden generosity wasn't random. Something had shifted. Around 11, my phone buzzed with a text from Dev. I glanced at the screen. Check the shred bin by conference room B. Now. I casually stood up, grabbed my coffee mug like I was going for a refill, and walked past conference room B. The industrial shredder sat in an alcove nearby. I glanced at the clear collection bin underneath. Torn paper fragments filled the container. I could make out partial client names, account numbers, date headers from expense reports. Someone had been shredding documents, recently, based on how full the bin was. My stomach turned. Someone was destroying evidence. And based on Blake's sudden generous mood and the timing, I had a pretty good idea who. I pulled out my phone and took several photos of the shredded material, careful to capture timestamps and identifiable fragments. Then I quietly alerted corporate via email. Observed unusual document destruction activity. Photos attached, appears recent. That afternoon, an announcement went out from Paulina. Team meeting at 4 o'clock. We're celebrating some client wins with a special event tomorrow night at the Harbor Club. Mandatory attendance, casual dress, drinks and appetizers on the company. The Harbor Club was expensive, the kind of place Blake usually expensed his fake client dinners to. I checked my calendar. Tomorrow night was Wednesday, exactly when Victoria had indicated the corporate site visit would happen. This wasn't coincidence. Somehow Blake or Paulina had gotten wind that something was coming, and they were creating an excuse to get everyone off site. 30 minutes later, Paulina stopped by my desk. Megan, I need you to handle the event logistics. Coordinate with the restaurant, manage the head count, arrange transportation. It'll be good visibility for you. Translation: they wanted me gone when corporate arrived, conveniently off-site, running an event, unable to participate in any surprise inspection. Of course, I said pleasantly. I'll get started on arrangements. Paulina smiled, satisfied. As soon as she walked away, I forwarded her written instruction to Victoria with one line, confirming I'm being directed away from premises during scheduled window. Victoria's response was immediate. Understood. We'll adjust timing. Continue as directed. Your absence will be noted. I spent the rest of the day planning the event, making phone calls and sending emails that created a documented trail of me following orders. Meanwhile, corporate was adjusting their plans. That night, I barely slept. Tomorrow would determine everything. Either Blake's system would finally face consequences, or I'd learn that power truly was untouchable. Wednesday morning, I arrived early. The office felt normal. People getting coffee, checking emails, the usual rhythm. Blake was already at his desk, on the phone with a client, sounding confident and professional. At 9:30, the front door opened. 3 people in corporate badges walked in, carrying tablets and briefcases. Victoria led them, her expression neutral but focused. I watched from my desk as Blake's phone conversation faltered mid-sentence. His smile froze. He recovered quickly, wrapping up the call and standing to greet them. "Victoria, this is unexpected. What brings you by?" His tone was friendly, welcoming, trying to control the narrative. Victoria smiled politely. "Routine operational review. Nothing to worry about. Is Paulina available?" Paulina emerged from her office, her own smile tight. "Of course. What can we help you with?" She was trying to sound casual, but I could see tension in her shoulders. "Conference room, please," Victoria said. It wasn't a question. The corporate team moved with quiet efficiency, setting up laptops and pulling files from their briefcases. Blake tried to laugh it off. "Wow, the full treatment. Should we be nervous?" One of the corporate auditors looked up at him. "We'll need access to client files, expense reports, and system audit logs. Specifically accounts managed personally by you, Mr. Hoffman." Blake's smile didn't quite reach his eyes anymore. "Sure, no problem, happy to help." But his voice had changed. Just slightly higher, just slightly faster. I stayed at my desk, headphones on, pretending to work while watching everything unfold in my peripheral vision. For 2 hours, the corporate team worked methodically. They pulled files, compared documents, asked quiet questions. Blake hovered nearby, trying to maintain his confident demeanor, but getting increasingly agitated. Paulina brought them coffee, attempted small talk, and got polite but distant responses. This wasn't a friendly visit, and everyone could feel it. Around noon, one of the auditors spoke calmly to Blake. "Mr. Hoffman, can you explain why several client meeting expenses don't appear in any calendar system or email confirmation?" Blake's response came smoothly. "Some relationships are maintained informally, quick dinners, casual check-ins. Not everything needs to be scheduled officially." He was using the exact explanation he'd given in our meeting, the one I documented in my recap email. The auditor made a note. "And these informal meetings still qualify as business expenses?" Blake nodded confidently. "Absolutely. Relationship maintenance is crucial in our industry." "Interesting," the auditor said, "because the clients you listed for these dinners have no record of meeting with you on those dates. We contacted them directly this morning." The color drained from Blake's face. Another auditor turned to a document on her screen. "We're also seeing discrepancies in client presentations, promised deliverables that don't align with contracted scope or regulatory approval." She looked at Blake. "Can you walk us through your process for client commitments?" Blake started to answer, then stopped, started again. His usual smooth confidence was cracking. "There may have been some miscommunication. You'd have to ask Megan about onboarding." "We have Miss Callahan's documentation," Victoria interrupted. "Complete contract files, communication logs, and policy citations. Very thorough. What we need is your explanation for the contradictions." Claire from accounting tried to defend Blake. "He's just aggressive with client relationships. Sometimes he promises things knowing we'll find a way to deliver." Her voice wavered as she spoke. Victoria turned to her. "So standard practice here is to promise clients deliverables before confirming feasibility or regulatory compliance?" Claire's face flushed. "No, that's not what I meant. I just meant Blake is very client-focused." "By making promises the company can't legally keep?" Victoria's tone remained calm, but the question landed like a hammer. Claire had just contradicted Blake while trying to help him. Paulina stepped in, her voice sharp. "I think we're making this bigger than it needs to be. These are minor process questions, not—" "Mrs. Santos," Victoria interrupted. "We need to see the documentation for Megan Callahan's performance improvement plan, particularly the specific behavioral examples and dates that triggered it." Paulina's mouth opened, closed. That's personnel information, confidential, Victoria smiled. We're corporate HR oversight. We have authority to review all personnel actions. Please provide the documentation. The room fell silent. Everyone could feel the shift. This wasn't a friendly operational review. This was an investigation, and it was expanding beyond Blake. After a long pause, one of the auditors spoke calmly, clearly, with words that made the entire office go silent. Effective immediately, this branch is under operational suspension pending investigation completion. Phones around the office stopped ringing. Conversations died mid-sentence. People looked up from their desks, confused and afraid. What does that mean? Someone asked from across the room. Victoria stood. It means all client accounts are being temporarily reassigned to other branches. All financial transactions will be reviewed, and all personnel decisions made in the past 6 months will be audited for compliance. By 2 o'clock, the office had transformed into something unrecognizable. Phones were being rerouted. Client files were being transferred to other branches. Corporate IT specialists were imaging hard drives and securing systems. Blake sat at his desk, staring at his computer screen. His Ferrari keys sat on the desktop, untouched. Nobody was laughing now. Nobody was making jokes or throwing things. Paulina emerged from a long conversation with Victoria, looking pale and shaken. She walked to her office without making eye contact with anyone, closed the door, and pulled the blinds. Around 3, security personnel arrived. Not aggressive or dramatic, just present. They positioned themselves near exits, polite but firm. People started whispering. Are we being fired? What did Blake do? Is Megan behind this? I kept my head down, continuing to process my assigned work as if everything was normal. Claire approached my desk hesitantly. Megan, did you know this was happening? Her voice was quiet, almost accusing. I looked up at her. I documented policy questions and compliance concerns. That's what I was sent here to do. Her face crumpled slightly. Blake said you were just trying to cause problems, that you didn't understand how things worked here. I felt a flash of sympathy for her. She'd been caught in Blake's orbit, defending him without understanding what he was really doing. Claire, did he ever ask you to submit expense reports for dinners you didn't actually attend? I asked quietly. She froze. How did you know about that? Before she could say more, Victoria appeared at my desk. Megan, can you join us in the conference room? I followed Victoria into the conference room. Blake and Paulina were already there, sitting on opposite sides of the table. Neither would look at the other. The corporate team had their laptops open, documents spread across the table. Victoria gestured for me to sit. Megan, we want to thank you for your thorough documentation. Your observations aligned with what our investigation has uncovered. She turned to Blake and Paulina. Mr. Hoffman, we've identified at least 17 instances of fraudulent expense reporting over the past 8 months. We've also documented multiple cases of client misrepresentation that exposed the company to legal liability. Blake's face was red, his jaw clenched. Mrs. Santos, we found evidence of retaliatory personnel actions, deliberate access, restrictions used to interfere with compliance functions, and failure to report known policy violations. Paulina's hands trembled in her lap. Victoria continued, her voice calm but absolute. Effective immediately, both of you are terminated for cause. You'll be escorted from the building today. HR will contact you regarding final pay and the investigation of potential criminal charges for fraud. Blake exploded. This is insane. You're destroying my career over some paperwork discrepancies? His voice rose. I've made this company millions. You can't just... We can, Victoria said quietly. And we are. She nodded to security. 2 officers stepped forward. Please collect your personal belongings. Company property, including keys and access cards, stays here. Blake stood up so fast his chair fell backward. He looked around the room like a trapped animal, searching for allies, for escape routes, for anything. He found none. The office watched in silence as Blake and Paulina were escorted through the building. Blake's desk was photographed and inventoried. His Ferrari keys were placed in an evidence bag, no longer symbols of power, just items to be catalogued. Paulina walked to her office one last time, collected her purse and coat, and left without speaking to anyone. Her usually perfect composure had crumbled completely. People gathered in small groups, whispering. Some looked relieved, others looked scared. wondering if they'd be next. Claire was crying quietly at her desk. Victoria addressed the remaining staff. Client accounts are being reassigned to ensure no service disruption. Those of you not under investigation will be offered positions at other branches or corporate. You'll receive details by end of week. One of the sales associates raised his hand. What about our commissions? Our projects? Victoria nodded. Everything will be honored according to contract. This branch's closure is not your fault. We're documenting who did what work, and credit will be assigned appropriately. The relief in the room was visible. People had been protecting Blake out of fear. Fear of his retaliation, fear of losing their jobs, fear of being next. Now that fear was gone, replaced by something that looked like oxygen. Dev caught my eye from across the room. He nodded once, a small gesture of acknowledgement. He'd taken a risk giving me that expense report tip. Now he knew it had mattered. Victoria pulled me aside as people started to pack up their desks. Megan, corporate wants you to lead the transition. Help reassign accounts, document processes, ensure nothing falls through the cracks. The branch officially closed for review 2 weeks later. Blake and Paulina were gone. The investigation uncovered even more fraud than initially suspected. Almost $30,000 in fake expenses over 18 months. Criminal charges were filed. Blake's attorney was already working on a plea deal. Paulina was fighting the termination, claiming she didn't know about Blake's activities, but her own emails told a different story. Staff members who'd been collateral damage were offered positions elsewhere. Most accepted. Claire took a role at a different branch, somewhere she could rebuild without Blake's shadow. Dev transferred to corporate IT, where his attention to detail was valued instead of punished. I didn't celebrate in the hallway or gloat about the outcome. I packed my desk quietly, head high, and accepted Victoria's offer, a role at corporate headquarters where my compliance work would be visible, valued, and protected. On my last day at the Riverside branch, I drove past the building one final time. The lights were off, the parking lot was empty. Blake's reserved spot near the entrance, the one with the sign that read Top Performer, was vacant. No Ferrari. No empire. No laughter rippling through meetings while someone held his keys. Just consequences, finally catching up to someone who'd believed they were untouchable. 3 months later, I started my new position in corporate compliance. My job was to identify toxic patterns before they became systemic, to document problems before they destroyed people, to ensure that what happened at Riverside didn't happen elsewhere. I still have the log I kept during those 3 months. Dates, times, quotes, witnesses, evidence. A reminder that people like Blake win by making you react emotionally, by isolating you, by convincing everyone that speaking up is more dangerous than staying silent. But I won by staying steady, by keeping receipts, by remembering my worth even when everyone around me tried to diminish it, and by walking away from a place that required me to beg for basic respect into a life where my work speaks louder than anyone's Ferrari keys ever could. Blake threw those keys at me like I was staff, like I was nothing. So I documented everything, stayed professional, and let the truth do what it does best, outlast the lies. And when the dust settled, his whole office shut down. Not because I wanted revenge, but because some systems are so toxic, the only solution is to let consequences rebuild from the ground up.